In the book of John, chapter 15, we see a really interesting verse, and it's titled Jesus, the True Vine. It goes like this in verse 1. I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that does not produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do not bear fruit so that they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This is a really fascinating passage to me, and it speaks to the reality that God prunes, that God trims, that God takes the situations that we find ourselves in and uses them for purpose. And it refines us, and it trims us, and it ultimately puts us in a position where we're going to be better for it in the long run. And this idea is something that I find really hard in the moment, in distance from the moment, like now, thinking about what God is saying. Like, it's easy to go, okay, cool. So God takes things and uses them for purpose. That's wonderful. He uses the difficult situations that we find ourselves in, the positive situations we find ourselves in, and he uses that to trim us so that, the more we get trimmed, the more we grow, the more fruit we produce. That's a great idea, but the reality is something completely different, right? Like when you find yourself in the middle of something awful, something horrendous, something that is outside of your control, the idea of, okay, well, God is using this to prune me and grow me. Like, it's a nice idea, but in reality, it doesn't actually help you in the moment because you're feeling hurt and pain, right? In the moment, it's hard to see the big picture because all you can see is what is directly in front of you. To me, though, I do find this passage comforting in one way or another because initially, I don't want to hear something like that. I don't want to hear that God is using whatever situation I'm facing to prune me and grow me. I don't want to hear that. I just want it to stop. But after I can take a moment to feel the hurt, to experience the pain that I find myself in, it's at that moment, not initially, but after some time has passed, after the hurt has kind of kicked in for a little while, after I've got space, this passage then can provide me with hope. Because it reminds me that in even this, God can do something. That even in my worst situation, God is still moving. God is still working. God is still using the negative things that I find in my life and is using it for purpose. So after I've felt the hurt, after I'm experiencing some grief when I'm facing these various situations, just like you, when we face the things that we find ourselves in, we're invited to ask ourselves this question: how is God using this? How is God refining me? How is God growing me? How is God pruning me? And how can I, in even this, find comfort that God is with me and using it for purpose? Because that's what this passage speaks of. That even in the worst of things, even in the deepest cuts, even in the deepest prunings, God is using this. And like I said, in the moment, like that doesn't work for me. But when I've had some space from a thing and I look back at my life, I can see how the really bad things, the negative things, the deep cuts, the deep prunings, it's actually in those things that God has been growing me and developing me. And I find comfort in that the way that God has moved in the past in my life, he will continue to move in the present and in the future. That regardless where you find yourself, whether it be in a post-pruning situation or you're in the middle of being pruned and some horrible things are going down, wherever you find yourself, this passage speaks to the fact that God isn't done and God is using this to bring purpose and growth in you. So even when you can't see it, God is moving. Even when you can't feel it, God is there, pruning and growing you. And until we talk again, I hope this brings you hope. And stay safe, hold hope, and we'll talk soon.